The sun was setting over Red River Gorge when a pair of golden eyes caught the faintest movement beneath the underbrush, a breath so weak that any predator would have dismissed the Labrador pup as already lost, just as the teenagers who abandoned him had assumed. Oliver paused in his nightly prowl, his ears twitching toward the almost imperceptible sound. The tabby cat, with a distinctive scar on his left ear, approached cautiously. His instinct warned him to move on, continue his night hunt, but something in the puppy's irregular gasping made him hesitate. 3 days earlier, during a camping trip, the puppy had fallen gravely ill. When an unexpected storm forced a rushed departure, the decision was made in an instant. "He won't make it," one of the boys muttered as the rain began to fall harder. "If we go back for him, we'll miss the bus." And so, amid the confusion of the storm and the hasty departure, the small caramel-coated Labrador was left behind, hidden under a partially torn tarp that barely protected him from the relentless rain. Oliver was no stranger to human cruelty. He himself had been abandoned as a kitten. The scar on his ear told stories of a life spent fighting to survive on the streets of Ash Hollow before choosing the freedom of the forest. He had become a local legend, a feral cat occasionally seen on the edges of town, never allowing humans to approach, yet never rejecting the food offerings left by compassionate residents. The cat circled the dying puppy cautiously. His whiskers contracted as they picked up the scent of fever and dehydration. Using one paw, he lightly touched the puppy's muzzle. There was no response beyond an almost imperceptible tremor. It was then that Oliver did something remarkable. He approached and began licking the dog's parched nose. Then, as if developing a strategy, he found a way to hydrate him, dipping the tip of his tail into puddles left by the rain and letting the drops fall into the Labrador's mouth. The night progressed, cold and persistent. Oliver, contrary to all his self-preservation instincts, lay down beside the puppy, pressing his smaller body against the dog's to share warmth. His golden eyes remained vigilant in the darkness, watching every shadow, every movement in the trees around them. The puppy, in his semi-conscious state, felt the warmth of the small body beside him. He couldn't see, couldn't move, but for the first time in days, he wasn't completely alone in the vast wilderness of Red River Gorge. The stars slowly rotated in the sky above them, silent witnesses to an unlikely alliance born in the depths of the forest, an alliance that, the following morning, would be tested by the harsh reality of wilderness survival. Dawn brought with it the gentle singing of birds and golden rays penetrating through the dense foliage. Oliver awoke immediately, his heightened senses catching the sound of something moving nearby. He rose, arching his back slightly in a feline stretch, before checking on the puppy. The Labrador was still breathing, but his condition had worsened overnight. His lips were cracked from dehydration, and a constant tremor ran through his body, despite the warmth that was beginning to settle with the rising sun. Oliver knew by pure instinct that the puppy urgently needed water and food. Without hesitation, he set off on a morning hunt, moving silently through the undergrowth like a shadow. It didn't take long to locate his first prey, a small field mouse that barely had time to notice the danger before being captured. Under normal circumstances, Oliver would have immediately satisfied his own hunger, but something about the puppy's desperate state had awakened unprecedented behavior in the solitary feline. He returned to where he had left the Labrador and deposited the mouse near his muzzle. The puppy, however, was too weak to respond. Oliver, displaying intelligence beyond instinct, began tearing small pieces of meat and placing them directly in the dog's mouth. After several attempts, the puppy finally swallowed a small piece, more an automatic reflex than a conscious action. Encouraged, Oliver continued the process, alternating between feeding and trips to a nearby puddle to bring water, using the method he had improvised with his tail. By midday, modest progress was visible. The Labrador had managed to swallow a few more pieces of food and enough water to slightly reduce his dehydration. His eyes, still clouded by fever, opened momentarily, capturing the blurred image of his unlikely savior. Oliver stayed nearby, leaving only for quick, necessary hunts. As the day progressed, he began exploring the area in concentric circles, as if looking for something specific. On the third expansion of his perimeter, he found what appeared to be the remains of an abandoned campsite, evidence of recent human presence. Among the debris left behind, Oliver discovered a plastic bottle with a little water still inside. The cat pushed the bottle with his nose, rolling it back to where the puppy was resting. In a demonstration of ingenuity that defied his wild nature, he managed to knock the bottle over so that the water spilled close to the Labrador's muzzle. The puppy, sensing the scent of fresh water, made an extraordinary effort to extend his tongue and sip a few drops. It was his first voluntary movement since Oliver had found him. As afternoon began to give way to dusk, a subtle change in the forest alerted the cat. His fur instantly bristled and his pupils dilated. A coyote had approached, perhaps attracted by the smell of the weakened puppy. An easy prey in the predator's view. Oliver could have easily escaped by climbing one of the nearby trees. Instead, he did something surprising. He positioned himself between the predator and the helpless puppy, arching his back and hissing fiercely, his golden eyes fixed on the much larger coyote. The coyote hesitated, confused by the small feline's bravado. He stepped forward, testing, but was met with more hissing and the distinctive sound of claws being extended. After a few moments of palpable tension, the coyote retreated, opting to look for a less complicated meal. When the darkness of night completely enveloped the forest, Oliver returned to his position next to the puppy. The Labrador's breathing, though still weak, had become more regular. Under the constant vigilance of his unlikely protector, the puppy fell into a less restless sleep than the night before. Oliver remained alert, his eyes occasionally gleaming in the darkness when they reflected some scattered light. The night promised new challenges, but the solitary cat had made an inexplicable decision even to himself. He would protect this young life, whatever it took. The third day dawned with a soft mist hovering over the vegetation. Oliver was already awake, watching the puppy attentively. During the night, the Labrador's fever had decreased slightly, a promising sign amid the precarious situation. The puppy had spent the entire night close to the cat's body, instinctively seeking the warmth essential for his survival. Now, with the first rays of sunlight, his eyes opened with more clarity than the day before. Oliver approached cautiously, studying the dog with renewed interest. The puppy, still too weak to stand, managed to raise his head slightly, his gaze fixing for the first time really on the wild cat. There was no fear in his brown eyes, only a childish curiosity and a profound weariness. The feeding strategy continued. Oliver, now more efficient in his targeted hunts, brought a small bird he had captured. With patience, he offered pieces to the puppy, who managed to chew with effort before swallowing. It was significant progress compared to previous days. Mid-morning, a decisive moment occurred. The puppy, gathering strength that seemed impossible just hours ago, managed to sit up for a few seconds before collapsing again. Oliver observed the scene with what could be interpreted as silent approval. Realizing that the puppy was gaining strength, Oliver began exploring the area more systematically. In one of his excursions, he found a small stream about 100 meters away. The discovery was vital. Fresh running water would be much better than the stagnant puddles he had been collecting from. The challenge now was to get the puppy there. Oliver returned quickly and began unusual behavior. He circled the dog, then moved away toward the stream, only to return and repeat the process as if trying to communicate his intentions. After several attempts, the puppy seemed to understand the message. With tremendous effort, he managed to stand on all four paws, though his body visibly trembled from the exertion. Oliver stayed close, adjusting his pace to the Labrador's as they began a slow and painful journey toward the stream. The journey, which Oliver could complete in seconds, transformed into an epic, almost an hour long. The puppy advanced a few steps and needed to rest, his legs still too weak to support him for long. At each pause, Oliver waited patiently, sometimes returning to station himself beside the dog, as if offering moral support. When they finally reached the stream's edge, the puppy practically collapsed at the water's edge. Eagerly, he began licking the fresh water, drinking more than his weakened stomach could handle. Oliver watched attentively, interfering only when the dog drank too quickly, touching him with his paw as if warning of the danger. The stream offered not only water, but also abundant shade thanks to the trees growing on the banks. Oliver decided this would be their new camp. The location offered better protection against predators, easy access to water, and more hunting opportunities nearby. The puppy, exhausted by the effort of walking, fell into a deep sleep under the refreshing shade. His breathing, though still weak, was visibly more regular. Color was beginning to return slightly to his gums, a sign that severe dehydration was receding. Oliver took advantage of the moment to hunt more intensively, knowing his small charge would need constant nutrition to regain strength. Upon returning with a medium-sized squirrel, he found the puppy awake and more alert than before. For the first time since they had met, the Labrador made a voluntary movement toward the cat. With effort, he dragged himself a few inches closer, emitting a soft whimper that could be interpreted as a greeting or a thank you. Oliver remained motionless for a few moments, his golden eyes fixed on the puppy, before approaching and depositing his catch between them. As the afternoon progressed, a light rain began to fall. Oliver guided the puppy under a tangle of exposed roots that formed a natural shelter against the precipitation. There, protected and with sufficient food for the moment, the two unlikely companions rested side by side, the sound of rain creating a soothing melody that eventually lulled them to sleep. That night was the first the puppy slept without constant tremors. The fever had subsided significantly, and although he was still weak, he seemed to have crossed the critical boundary between the struggle for survival and the beginning of recovery. The dawn of the fourth day brought a notable change. The Labrador puppy managed not only to stand up on his own, but also to walk a few meters without falling, though his steps were still hesitant and unstable. Oliver observed the transformation with what could be described as satisfaction, if such an emotion could be attributed to a wild cat. After drinking at the stream and consuming a bit more of the prey Oliver had provided, the puppy demonstrated new behavior, curiosity. He began exploring the small perimeter around their makeshift shelter, sniffing fallen logs and rocks, typical behavior of a healthy puppy, albeit executed with less energy than normal. In a touching moment, the Labrador approached Oliver and, with clumsy gestures typical of his youth, tried to initiate play. The cat, initially cautious, eventually allowed limited interaction, though maintaining his reserved nature. This first demonstration of playful behavior was an unequivocal sign that the puppy was on the path to recovery. However, Oliver seemed concerned with something beyond the dog's immediate well-being. Frequently, he climbed on elevated rocks or logs, looking eastward, as if searching for something specific on the horizon. After one of these observations, he made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. With deliberate movements, Oliver began guiding the puppy away from the stream eastward. The Labrador, who now consistently responded to the cat's presence, followed without hesitation, though his pace was significantly slower. The journey through Red River Gorge's dense vegetation was challenging even for animals in peak form. For a puppy still recovering, it represented an extraordinary ordeal. Oliver demonstrated unusual patience, constantly adjusting his rhythm to that of his young companion, waiting when fatigue became evident. Approximately every hour, they paused for rest and hydration. Oliver had developed a remarkable sense for locating water sources, guiding the puppy to small streams and puddles that would otherwise have gone unnoticed. During these intervals, the cat frequently disappeared for a few minutes, returning with small prey that he shared with the dog. In the middle of the afternoon, they faced their first serious obstacle. The path they were following ended abruptly at a slope too steep for the Labrador to climb in his current state. Oliver carefully assessed the situation, disappearing for almost 20 minutes while exploring alternatives. Upon returning, he guided the puppy along a longer but more gradual path, circumventing the slope. This decision demonstrated not only intelligence, but also an understanding of his protégé's physical limitations. As the sun began to set, they had covered a considerable distance, though far short of what Oliver could have traveled alone. The cat located a small protected space between rocks, ideal for spending the night. The puppy, exhausted by the day's journey, fell asleep almost immediately. His sleep, however, was now that of a tired animal, not one on the brink of death. His breathing was strong and regular, his posture relaxed instead of collapsed. Oliver remained vigilant for some time, his acute senses capturing every sound of the night forest. Eventually, satisfied with the location's safety, he also allowed himself to rest, though his sleep was light and intermittent, as is typical of solitary predators. In the early morning, a distant sound made Oliver's ears move suddenly. He rose, fully alert, and climbed one of the nearby rocks. On the eastern horizon, far beyond what human eyes could discern in the darkness, shone the first lights of Ash Hollow. The cat observed those lights for long minutes, as if calculating distances and possibilities. When he returned to the puppy, he seemed to have solidified his plan. About 3 miles remained to the town, a distance that, at the Labrador's current pace, would mean another full day of journeying. When the first rays of sunshine began painting the sky, Oliver gently woke the puppy with the touch of his paw. The journey needed to continue, and time, though not speaking openly, was not in their favor. The puppy needed more substantial care than Oliver could provide in nature. With one last look westward, in the direction from which they had come, the two unlikely companions resumed their march eastward, toward a civilization that one sought and the other generally avoided. The fifth day dawned with a soft mist hovering over the forest that gradually gave way to more open fields. Oliver and the Labrador puppy continued their slow but determined journey toward Ash Hollow. The dog's progress was remarkable. He could now maintain a steady pace for longer periods, though he was still far from his normal capacity. As they advanced, the landscape subtly changed. Dense trees gave way to more spaced woodlands and eventually to semi-open fields. Signs of human presence became more frequent, an old fence crossing the path, more defined trails, occasionally the distant sound of vehicles. Oliver demonstrated increasing caution. For a cat who had deliberately chosen to avoid humans for years, approaching civilization represented a significant risk. He frequently stopped, testing the air and listening attentively before proceeding. The puppy, meanwhile, seemed to gain energy as the familiar sense of human presence became more perceptible. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of a large open field. In the distance, the outlines of the first houses of Ash Hollow could be seen. Oliver stopped at the forest's edge, reluctant to venture into the exposed space. The puppy, however, advanced a few steps, his tail wagging weakly for the first time since he was found. It was at this crucial moment that Oliver seemed to make an internal calculation. Returning to the forest meant safety for him, but uncertainty for the puppy who still needed care. Continuing to the town represented risk for himself, but the best chance for the young Labrador. After a few minutes of apparent indecision, Oliver advanced, keeping close to the field's higher vegetation whenever possible. The puppy followed him confidently, his step now firmer and more determined. When they finally reached the small town's limits, Oliver became extremely cautious. He knew Ash Hollow better than any human could suspect. He knew which yards had dogs, which residents left food for stray animals, and which were hostile to wild creatures like him. He guided the puppy through alleys and less busy passages, carefully avoiding main streets where they could be easily spotted. The objective seemed clear in his feline mind: find the right human, someone who would help the puppy without posing a threat to himself. In the early afternoon, they arrived at a house on the town's outskirts. It was a modest construction, painted in soft yellow, with a large front garden meticulously cared for. A fair grey-haired woman worked among the flowers, kneeling with gardening tools scattered around her. Oliver recognized her instantly. She was Winona, a retired nurse known for taking in abandoned animals. Many times in his days as a street cat, he had benefited from the food she left in her yard, though he had never allowed her to approach. Now, the cat faced a final decision. With deliberate movements, he guided the puppy to the edge of Winona's garden, remaining partially hidden in the taller vegetation. Then, to the Labrador's surprise, he gave him a small push with his head, encouraging him to advance alone. The puppy hesitated, looking back at his savior with evident confusion. He tried to return to Oliver, but the cat maintained distance, silently communicating that this was the direction the young dog needed to follow alone. Finally understanding, the Labrador hesitantly advanced into the garden. Winona, absorbed in her work, didn't immediately notice the puppy's presence until he emitted a soft whimper. The woman looked up, startled. Her surprise quickly turned to concern when she saw the puppy's condition, still visibly malnourished and dehydrated, despite the remarkable improvement of recent days. "Oh my God," she murmured, approaching cautiously so as not to frighten the animal. "Where did you come from, little one?" Winona knelt to examine the puppy, noting the evident marks of recent privation, but also something curious. Certain areas of his coat were surprisingly clean, as if they had been carefully treated. It was upon raising her gaze that she glimpsed a pair of golden eyes watching her from the vegetation. Oliver remained motionless for a moment, his eyes meeting Winona's in silent recognition, before retreating and disappearing into the shadows. Winona, who had lived her entire life in Ash Hollow and knew the stories about the elusive wild cat with a scarred ear, immediately understood what she had witnessed. Gently, she picked up the puppy in her arms. "Looks like you had quite an unusual guardian angel," she said softly, stroking the Labrador's head while looking at the spot where Oliver had disappeared. "We'll take care of you now." He did his part. As Winona carried the puppy into the house, Oliver watched from a safe distance, partially hidden under a bush. Only when the door closed did he allow himself to relax, his mission apparently complete. However, instead of immediately returning to the safety of the forest, the wild cat established an observation post in an old oak tree near Winona's house. From there, he could keep watch over his protégé without being detected. The decision to remain, even temporarily, on the edges of a civilization he had long avoided marked a profound change for Oliver, a transformation as significant as the physical recovery of the puppy he had saved. Under Winona's attentive care, the Labrador puppy, now called Bram, recovered rapidly. The retired nurse used her medical knowledge and vast experience with abandoned animals to treat the dehydration, malnutrition, and small wounds the puppy had accumulated during his time in the wild. In the first few nights, Bram frequently whimpered, positioning himself near the window and looking outside with evident longing. Winona initially interpreted the behavior as trauma from abandonment, but soon realized that the puppy wasn't simply scared. He was looking for someone. "So that's it," she murmured on the third night, observing Bram staring fixedly at the old oak tree at the edge of her property. "So also you miss your wild friend." In an unusual decision, Winona began leaving small portions of high-quality food at the edge of her garden near the oak tree. The food disappeared during the night, without her ever managing to spot who took it, though occasionally she thought she saw a golden gleam among the oak's leaves. As the weeks passed, the story of the rescued puppy and his unlikely savior spread throughout Ash Hollow. Winona had shared the event with a local journalist friend, and soon the Red River Gorge miracle, as it was called, became a topic of conversation throughout the small town. The account eventually reached the ears of the teenagers responsible for abandoning the puppy. Confronted with the evidence and community pressure, they confessed their actions. Instead of legal punishment, a different solution was reached. The boys would complete community service at the local animal shelter. For Cyrus, the group's leader, the experience was transformative. He later decided to pursue a career in veterinary medicine, determined to compensate for his error in judgment. As time passed, Winona realized that her small house wasn't the ideal environment for a growing Labrador. Her grandson, Everett, who owned a farm on the outskirts of town, offered to take in Bram, a home with abundant space for a large, energetic dog. On the morning of Bram's departure, something unexpected happened. The dog, now healthy and considerably larger than when he arrived, momentarily escaped his leash and ran to the old oak tree. There, to Winona and Everett's surprise, he found Oliver sitting on the stone wall beneath the tree. The two animals stared at each other for a long moment, communicating in a silent language inaccessible to the humans present. Then, breaking his usual distance, Oliver approached and gently licked Bram's ear, exactly as he had done the first time they met in the forest. "Extraordinary," murmured Everett, keeping his distance so as not to frighten the elusive feline. "I've never seen anything like it." "Some bonds transcend nature," replied Winona, observing the interaction with watery eyes. That cat saved Bram when no one else could. That kind of connection doesn't break easily." After a few minutes of silent farewell, Bram voluntarily returned to Winona and Everett. As they led him to his new home, the Labrador looked back several times, his eyes fixed on the solitary cat, who remained motionless on the stone wall. Months later, during a visit to Winona's house, something unexpected occurred. Bram, now a young, energetic Labrador, suddenly became agitated, barking insistently at the back door. When Winona opened it, he dashed to the garden, straight to a specific bush. There, hidden in the shadows, was Oliver, but something was different. The wild cat was visibly injured, one of his front paws held suspended, indication of a possible encounter with a predator or an accident. Without hesitation, Bram took the lead, positioning himself beside Oliver and gently encouraging him to move toward the house, exactly as the cat had done for him months before. Winona watched the scene unfold in amazement. "Oh, well, I'll be," she whispered, opening the door wider to receive both animals. "Seems like it's time to return the favor." In the following weeks, Oliver remained in Winona's care. Initially skittish and distrustful, he gradually adapted to confined life, though he never became fully domesticated. His relationship with Bram, however, was unshakable. The two were inseparable during the cat's recovery. When Oliver's paw healed, Winona expected him to return to the wild. Instead, the cat established a unique routine. He spent his days freely wandering the area, but returned each evening to sleep on Winona's porch, often beside Bram during the dog's visits from Everett's farm. News of the remarkable friendship between the once feral cat and the abandoned puppy he had saved transformed Ash Hollow. Pet adoptions soared, new programs for stray animals were introduced, and people gained a new appreciation for the depth of animal compassion. Today, in the heart of Mercy Plaza, a statue stands, a Labrador and a cat side by side. The plaque beneath it reads simply, "To remind us that kindness knows no species." The story of Oliver and Bram continues to be told in Ash Hollow and beyond, a testament to the extraordinary bonds that can form in the most unlikely circumstances, and a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from where we least expect it. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.